All righty. If you would, go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 31. And we're going to continue on. We're going to continue on as we're going through. The good news is we did make up some time last week, so that's good. I still think we might be a couple messages behind, but that's okay. Well, it's not that many anymore, so that was good. But we're going to go through, starting off in Genesis chapter 31. We're going to start at verse 11. We'll read 11, 12, and 13. We'll read those, and then we'll continue on going. Let me get my fancy specs there. All right, Genesis chapter 31, verse 11. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up now thine eyes, and see, all the rams which leap upon the garden are ring-straked, speckled and grizzled, for I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out of this land, and return to the land of thy kindred. Father, we want to thank you once again for your word. As we take a look at these passages, again, may we understand where they are in time, understand the place where they're found, who they're written to, what they're about. Not to place ourselves there, but we can learn some things from them. And as we take a look at these things, that we may be mindful of that we can come to a greater knowledge and appreciation of your word. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now, as we've taken a look at this, last week we started off in Genesis chapter 31. We got up to these verses. We kind of looked at verses 11 through 13, and so I wanted to pick back up there and then move forward with that. And you notice here in verse 11 it says, The angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And of course, we've talked about that phrase, here am I, or some variation of that throughout Scripture so far, how many times we've seen that. And I would say, that was one of those statements that Martin Luther made during the Protestant Reformation and all that stuff. And it was just interesting. There was a book that I've got that was written about him, and that was the title of it. And it's just, to me, it's one of those things. It's always, I think that's probably the best response that you could have anytime that you're asked or something. Here am I, and it's basically saying I'm ready. Right? Whatever you need me to do, I'm ready to go and do it. And it's not, well, just hang on a minute, or, I might just give me a second, or what, but it's, I'm here. I'm ready to listen, right? And it's interesting because we see there in verse 11, it says, And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream. And then you see down there in verse 13, what do we see? I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return to the land of thy kindred. And of course, we looked at that last time. If you go back to when he actually set that up, is back in chapter 28. Remember, and of course, that's where he had the dream of the ladder going up and down, the angels going up and down. We see that down here, and you notice in verse 20 or verse 19, and he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of that city was called Luz at the first. Verse 20, And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I may come to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And of course, that's the vow that he vowed, that God's talking to him and reminding him about over here in chapter 31. And what did he say? If you do these things, which we talked about, God said, I'm going to do this. And Jacob says, well, if you do this, then you're going to be my God. And we get over here to chapter 31, and what's God do? He reminds me of that vow that he vowed. And he said, this is what you said you're going to do. I've been with you. I've done this, and I'm going to take you, and I'm going to take you back into the land. And that's exactly what he says here in verse 13. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowedst a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return to thy land, to thy kindred. And of course, we talked about that's almost the exact opposite of what God said to Abram, right? God says to Abram, get thee out of thy country, away from thy kindred, and I'm going to show you a place. Here he's saying, I want you to go back to the land of your kindred. Verse 14, And Jacob and Leah answered and said unto, or Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion of inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours, and our children's, now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon his camels. Now, what is it that Rachel and Leah do there? They're saying, notice in verse 16, they say, for all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's, now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, what? Do it. When God says, get back to the place of your kindred, they're saying what? Let's go. Okay. Verse 17, then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods, which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Padoram, for to go to Isaac, to his father, Isaac his father, in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's, and Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not, that he fled. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. Now, what's interesting there, when you look at that in verse 19, and Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's, and Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not, that he fled. Now, when you look at that, and of course, in my mind, I'm going to other things as well. When you read that verse 20, and it says, Jacob stole away unawares to Laban, the first thing I think of is Galatians chapter 2, right? In Galatians chapter 2, what do you have in Galatians chapter 2 is you have some folks there that are unaware, and they bring in false apostles or false information, false believers, if you will, brings these folks in, and they're unaware of what's going on. And that's immediately what my mind goes to. And what happens here is, and Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, and he told him not, that he fled. And again, there's some things that we can do with that, but I just kind of point that out for you. Verse 21. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river, and he set his face toward Mount Gilead. And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled. And he took his brethren with him, and pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night. Now, pause there for a second. What do we notice in verse 20 and in verse 24 about Laban? What is it that we're told about Laban that we've not been told or been privy to so far? That he's a Syrian, right? So it's one of those things. It's because if you go back when we first told about Laban is back here a little bit farther in chapter 29 and all that stuff. But what we find out here is he's added this issue of Laban the Syrian. All right, and of course there's a lot of things that we can get into with Syrian. Who is it that's going to be? Where is it that the Antichrist is going to come from one day? Is going to be in that region, right? So it's one of those things you kind of think about those things. Is it important? Is it important enough for us to notice in verse 20 and verse 24 that we should at least store that in the back of our mind and keep that in mind as we move forward? Because all of a sudden he says it's not just Laban, but it's what? Laban the Syrian. Right? So kind of keep those things in the back of our mind as we go on. Verse 24. And God said to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword? Now pause for a second. What did God just do to Laban? In verse 24, told him not to talk to him. What's he do in verse 26? Talks to him, right? So to me, it's an interesting thing that All of a sudden, we're told Laban the Syrian, and what's Laban the Syrian do? Does the exact opposite of what God says. To me, that's an interesting thing that it pops up here, that he's referenced as Laban the Syrian, and then what we see is God speaks to Laban the Syrian in a dream and says, don't speak to Jacob, either good or bad.
How would you identify Jacob at this time?
What do you mean?
Is he a Jew? Is he a Syrian? I mean, his dad was a Syrian.
Who, Jacob?
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they come from Syria.
Well, they came from Ur the Chaldees is where Abram came out of, right?
Laban was his brother, right?
Abraham's brother? I'm trying to think that lineage.
Well, anyway,
No, you're fine. But I mean, so the thing is so you don't even have anything with Israel yet. So you wouldn't even have that Jewish issue because, well, over here in chapter 32 is when Jacob becomes Israel.
that's why I was saying maybe he's calling him a Syrian, but letting us know
That there's some connection there.
Jacob.
Perhaps. And so my thing too is just thinking about the fact that he's pointing out here you've got Laban the Syrian, I'm telling you this, and then Laban does the exact opposite of what God's asking him to do, or what tells him to do. And he says, don't do this, don't talk to him whether good or bad. And it could be a couple of different things, because we know in chapter 32, which we're getting ready to get to, is he does change his name to Israel, and that's the first time that you kind of have that. And that's one of those things, a lot of times people take a look at that stuff and they'll look at Abraham was a Jew and an Israelite. Well, Israel doesn't exist until really over here, and really they don't exist as a country or as a nation until they come out of Egypt. So there's a whole bunch of things with that, but that's a good point. It's possible that could be another reason. But also it's this issue of has Laban, first time when we go back to chapter 29, Jacob says, I want Rachel. He says, what do I need to do to get her? And of course Laban sneaks in Leah, and then he says, okay, well, what do I need to do? And he says, well, in our country, this is how we do this. We got to get the elder out first before the younger. So there's a whole bunch of things that could be going on there as well. But here we see verse 26 that Laban does the exact opposite. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure that we maintain as we go through here is, as you go through the Bible, the main issue on our end is that what? You take God at His word. All right? That's what faith is. Here, what do we see? Laban, he does the exact opposite of that, right? In verse 26, and Laban said to Jacob, what hast thou done? Thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword. Now, when you take a look at that, is that good or bad? Well, it's bad. So God said, don't talk to him, whether it's good or bad. And of course, he's coming in and doing that. Verse 27, wherefore didst thou flee away secretly and steal away from me, and didst not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with myrrh, with mirth, and with songs, with tabret, and with harp? Now, question, do you really think that Laban would have done that? No, not at all. And of course, that's that on the other side of it. Yeah, this is exactly what I would have done. No, you wouldn't have. Because, yeah. So then you're thinking about these things, and of course he's saying this, says, yeah, I would have made a big party for you. Now, verse 28, and hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Thou hast not done foolishly, and thou hast not now done foolishly in so doing. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, take heed that thou speak not to Jacob, either good or bad. Well, at least he's truthful in that, right? And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? Now, that's the biggest issue, right? So when you're going back here, when you go back here in verse 19, and Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's, what images was it that she was taking with her? She was taking the images of these false gods, and that's what Laban's upset about. Is you've gone away, you've not let me kiss my kids goodbye. But also in verse 30, and now though thou wouldest needs be gone, you need to be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? What's his biggest problem there? The thing he's more upset about is you're taking my golden images and all these things over here with that has to do with my gods. And Jacob answered, said to Laban, because I was afraid. Now, let's pause there for a second. Is it any shock that Laban is up here doing the exact opposite of what God asked him to do when we find out and he's worried about his gods? No, right? Verse 31, and Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure thou wouldest take by force thy daughters from me. With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. Before our brethren, discern thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee, for Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. Now, Jacob's response to this is what? I don't want them around here anyway. I didn't know that they were here. Get rid of them. Take the person and take their life, the one that's stolen them. Now, who is it that's stolen them? Rachel. Now he's in a predicament, right? And he didn't know that she was the one that took them. Verse 33, and Laban went into Jacob's tent and unto Leah's tent and into the two maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images and put them in the camel's furniture and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And he said to her father, and she said to her father, let it not displease my lord, that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. And Jacob was wroth and chode with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin, that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Really, what is it that he's after? What's the main thing that Laban's after? He's not upset that Jacob left. He's not upset that his sons and daughters are gone. The thing that he's upset about is his religious system's gone. You've taken my images. That's why he's there. Notice in verse 37, whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This 20 years have I been with thee. Now, how long was he supposed to be with him? 7. And because of what he did with Leah, so then he gets 7 more, so that's at least 14. So Jacob stuck around for at least 6 more years. All right, so he's saying, I've been here 20 years with thee. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beast I brought not unto thee. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day that the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. And the idea is he's bringing up with Laban is what? You've not been fair in any of this stuff. And of course we understand what's taking place here in the context as well. But he's saying, basically what he's telling him is, I know that you weren't going to put on a little party for me as I left. Because you changed the wages 10 different times. And that's exactly what he told to Rachel and Leah whenever they left. Verse 42. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hast sent me away now empty. God hath seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. Now that's taking him back to that dream, right? And the one time that Laban's actually truthful with him here is what we've got. He says, and he rebuked thee yesternight. And Laban answered and said unto Jacob, these daughters are my daughters. Nope. You said 7 years, I served it. You said 7 more years for Rachel, I served it. I've done this, right? He says, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle. Again, no. And all that thou seest is mine, and what can I do this day unto these my daughters, or unto their children which they have borne? Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant. Now, what's interesting is there's a whole bunch of stuff, and again, this idea of the unawares and things like that, and we got this the images of the gods and all that stuff that's taking place. And down here, what is it that Laban says? He says, well, let's just make a covenant. Yeah, I mean, the other 10 times you've changed things. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. He says, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. Now again, one of the things that we kind of see contrasted here is, has God been truthful to what he said to Jacob the entire time? And has Laban been truthful at any time with Jacob? He's done the opposite, right? So you got man's wisdom and God's wisdom on display in those two, right? And of course, when man comes along and says, well, let's make a covenant. Growing up, Kenneth Copeland, all that stuff, become a covenant partner with us. That's what I think of when I see something like that. What's funny is you get a letter when you stop giving, and it's not a good letter. It's a letter of, anyway. Verse 44. Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, gather stones, and they took stones and made an heap. And they did eat thereupon the heap. And Laban called it Jegar-Sahadutha. Try that one out. But Jacob called it Gilead. Now, what's interesting is Jegar-Sahadutha, it's Chaldean for the heap of witness. Jacob calls it Gilead, which is Hebrew for the heap of witness. Witness. Oh, I can't say that word. So one's Chaldean, the other one is Hebrew. And what's interesting is, notice, and Laban said, this heap is a witness. There we go. Between me and thee this day, therefore was the name of it called Gilead. And Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between me and thee, when we are absent from one another, if thou shalt afflict my daughters, or if thou shalt take other wives beside my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness betwixt me and thee. And Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold this pillar which I have cast betwixt me and thee. This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. So what are they doing there? They're setting up a border. They're using these stones to set up a border, right? It's that, you remember when you're playing as a kid and you're like, draw lines, like, I dare you to cross that line. And then they do, and you're like, I dare you to cross that line. Huh? It's a... It's kind of like a beacon, but they've named it Mizpah. It's a beacon, is what it is. It's yeah. So it's the same as yeah. And so yeah. So then, and we see that. Notice he says, "The Lord watch between me and thee." So it's kind of like it's a watchtower type, but it's not the watchtower. If anybody's understand what the watchtower is, it's not that. But that's where they get that from, right? But that's what it is. It's a beacon, kind of like to let everybody know. And you notice here in Laban, verse 51, and Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold this pillar, which I have cast betwixt me and thee. This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor. The God of their father judge betwixt us, and Jacob sware by the fear of his father Jacob, by his father Isaac. What's the difference between those two? What is it that Jacob did it by? Well, by the God of who? Abraham and the fear of Isaac, right? You see back in verse 42. Here, what is it that Laban does? He says, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge betwixt us. And Jacob sware by the fear of his father Isaac rather than Nahor. Then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount and called his brethren to eat bread. And they did eat bread and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned unto his place. The whole thing there just is this. You see the word of God and the word of man. And what is it that... No, okay. I thought there was an answer there. It was like chapter 51. So when you look at what is it that Laban is going back to? He's going back to Abraham. He's going back, and so he's going back to Abraham and the God of Nahor. And who is it that Isaac or Jacob goes to? Is the God of Abraham and. Mm. So then here he's going by, so it's a different lineage, right? It's Abraham and Isaac is what Jacob's going off of. And Laban's going Abraham and Nahor.
I still don't understand the significance. I mean, is there one that's before they were before the lineage of the Jews?
I think it's just the different lineage between the two. And again, you think about when Jesus is talking to the disciples, or not to the disciples, but when he was talking to the religious leaders at his particular time, he says, don't say that you have Abraham as your father, because everybody over there pretty much can go back to Abraham. But who do you go to after that? Right? What's the lineage that you're going to follow? Here you got Abraham, then you got Nahor, then you got Abraham, and you got Isaac. Well, which one is that God's working through? Abraham and Isaac, right? And then to Jacob. And so then part of that has to do with you're not part of that lineage, Jacob.
Nahor was Abraham's great-great-great-grandfather.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's then is also So what it is he's trying to make a different lineage there. So, and I think that goes back to the fact that here you've got this guy who doesn't do what God wants him to do, and he's actually worried more about his gods and the images of his gods. So it's a different lineage, but they both use Abraham as the basis of it.
Is Rachel taking it for the monetary value of the images, or is she just taking it because before she said, well, what's our part in getting married? And then we're leaving. So is she just grabbing some money and running?
Maybe. Yeah. He's going to be missing it, right, when worship time comes. But I don't know if it would be for a monetary value. It could possibly be for the monetary value, but I don't know.
Well, she just acknowledged that whatever your God told you, Jacob, will do it.
Yeah.
Then she grabbed these false images.
And then she grabs the false images. So it's either it could be for the monetary value of it, or she just didn't like her dad, perhaps, and the whole system. I mean, it could be something. It could be either one of those. And she would have been. That's what I'm saying. So I don't know if it was for the monetary purpose or because she thinks it means something. Either way, she's bringing in this Baal worship along with them, and Jacob has no idea, right? And so so for whatever purpose, we don't really know if it's for the monetary reason or if she actually does think something up, because obviously she was brought up in that. Either way, she's bringing in these images of Baal worship, and Jacob has no idea. Even though she says, yeah, let's go because that's what God said. Let's follow what your God says and let's do that. So I don't know the exact purpose of why she would have, but it could have been one of those two or a combination of both. Perhaps.
Like she wants another security. Like
Yeah.
that God feels like
If this one doesn't work, then I've got this one to fall back on. Yeah.
Goes back where he said, if you are.
Yeah.
And she's going, well, if you are, but just in case you're not.
Yeah. So it could be that same thing. Yeah.
Or it could be back to 31:14 where it says, is there any portion of inheritance for us?
Yeah. And that's what Mark's point is like, well, I'm going to take something with me. Yeah. And that's,
My part up front.
yeah. And that's to Mark's point is, well, I'm not getting anything. So what I'll get, well, I'll just take some gold with me. So it could be the monetary reason for it. It could be because she does think that. And of course, we don't really know. One day we'll ask her if she's there. Leah and Rachel. About those, I don't think so.
Laban just kind of gives up.
What's odd is like he says, okay, let's make this covenant, and he goes away.
It's like he says, okay.
To
Because
me-
he says everything here is mine.
Yeah.
Everything is mine that you're looking
Everything.
at. Okay, so let's make this covenant. And
Yeah.
then you can have it all.
Even though we've already made an agreement and I've given all this to you and you've fulfilled your parts, I'm still going to say that it's mine. Then all of a sudden he's like, all right, I don't see the stuff, so I'm going to give it up.
But that's kind of like Abimelech.
Yeah.
Afraid of God.
Yeah. But I don't think that's what that is with Laban. No, because Laban's more worried about his gods and the images of his gods than he is the God of Abraham and Isaac. So I think that's why it's important why we see the difference between Abraham and Nahor and Abraham and Isaac there.
But he knew God had given him a dream.
Hmm.
So, I mean, he did.
And he does recognize that. Yeah.
He's also worried about the profitability, right? He's also financially, he's taking all this cattle and everything, and he's saying, my flock is not fat. where it used to
Yeah. Yeah. And I've lost money. So his could also be that as well.
And he knew God had blessed Jacob the whole time.
Yeah.
He confessed that as well.
He did.
He said, God, you've been
And he said, that's the reason why I'm keeping you around. It's because God's blessed you. And that's, I'm reaping from, I'm benefiting in what you're getting. Yeah. 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 Huh. Oh, I thought somebody said that. But yeah, in verse 55, and early in the morning, Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters, blessed them, and Laban departed and returned unto his place. Now, again, you could think about, well, he says, your God came to me and did that, but he could also think that it would have been his as well. But again, that connection that they both have with Abraham, he's making that connection that God's Abraham, the God of Abraham is also mine as well. So he's making that. But where he goes wrong is that next step, right? So chapter 32. So in chapter 32 is when we actually get his name changed. And it's interesting because if you remember back, what was God told him to name him Jacob, right? Part of that is, what does Jacob mean? Supplanter, which is exactly what he did, right? And when he changes his name to Israel, what does Israel mean? It's Prince of God. So there's something that's going to take place, and of course there's some other things that come along with that we'll see as we move forward. But well, if you supplant, for instance, who was supposed to get the blessing was Esau, but Jacob took it, right? So he supplanted Esau. So he took his place, he took it from him. So for instance, like if somebody has particular power in some company and somebody supplants them, we're going to kick you out and I'm going to take this over.
Same Steve felt, right? I mean, even though that's what it seems like he's doing, it's the object that becomes the substitute,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It doesn't mean thief.
No, it doesn't mean thief, but it's the idea of I'm taking your place.
That it means
Yeah.
He had to do that.
Huh?
Jacob had to do that.
Yeah.
He had to get rid of Esau.
Well, he had to take his place. Yeah.
He had to switch places.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was God.
Yeah. And so that's why his name was Jacob, is because that's what he did. Yeah. So in chapter 32, and of course that's what we get in chapter 32. But notice chapter 30.
Too. You don't hear anything else about Laban.
I don't think that you do.
He's mentioned, well, he's mentioned in retrospect as far as what he did for Rebecca.
Yeah, but not anything new. Yeah. And so then that kind of makes me think he probably did stay on his side of the border. Otherwise, he would have had a reason to. But yeah, that's a good point. Chapter 32, and Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host," and called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob said thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now, and I have oxen and asses, flocks and manservants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels, into 2 bands, and said, If Esau come to be one company, and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. Now, Jacob sends this information out, and Esau decides what? I'm going to come and fight. So I'm bringing 200 men, and what Jacob does is he splits everybody up, and this is one of the first times you get to see, like, all right, if you're going to come, we're going to figure out a way that we're going to take care of this. And so what he does, he says, if he comes in and takes over one company and takes it, then the other ones are going to come in. Which is left shall escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and the God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, Return into thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with thee well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all these mercies, all the mercies, and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now am I become 2 bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. Now, pause for a second. What was it that God told Jacob? Go home. I'm going to get you there, right? I'll be with you. And he says, and if you think back in chapter 28, and you don't have to go back there if you don't want to, but he says, I am with thee, and I will keep thee in all places, whither thou goest, and will bring thee again to this land, and I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. God's telling him what? I'm going to take you back to the country, and I'm going to be with you the entire time until I get you back. And what is it that Jacob's response here is what? Right? Notice he says, he brings it up in verse 9, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, Return to thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become 2 bands. Deliver me, I pray thee. What's God already promised him? I'm going to. And you still have this idea of he's saying what? I remember? And you remember back when we talked about that, he says, if you do this, and if you do this, and if you do this, then you'll be my God. And again, it's this idea of, has Jacob fully trusted what God's told him? He's saying, all right, deliver me, I pray thee. What's God already told him? I'm going to. You're going to go back to the country, and I'm going to be with you until you get to that country. Right? He says, "Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother of with the children. And thou saidst, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude," which is true. "And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camels which were with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, Pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. And he commanded the foremost, saying, When Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, Who art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then shalt thou say, They be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. So it's this idea, is he's saying, send these out, wait a little bit, send out some more, wait a little bit, send out some more. And when the first people get with Esau, say what? I'm with Jacob, and he sent these things to us, but he's behind us, right? Verse 19, And so commanded he the second and the third and all that followed the drove, saying, On this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. What's Jacob trying to do? He's trying to look at all this I've got. I'm going to give these as presents to you. Could you take it easy on me when I get back? And that's what it is. It's a guilty conscience. She's trying to butter him up and trying to make sure. And
Tell them to say, well, we got more coming.
yeah, there's more behind us. Yeah. And so then he's back. He's going to come, but we're going to send these things at the beginning. Again, does that sound like somebody that believes that God's taking him there?
No.
Again, it's like,
Terrible plan.
it's a horrible plan. Yeah.
Why would you ever split your plan?
Yeah. Well, the idea is what he's, Well, so in my mind, what I think he's doing is I'm going to send some people out, and if his people attack them, then we're going to.
Where's he going to go? See, I mean,
Oh, it's a terrible plan. But I mean, isn't that kind of a good track record for Jacob sometimes? Yeah. And that's instead of being up front, and he's going to be in the back, right? Yeah. Yeah, it was like, you all go ahead. Verse 19, And so commanded he the second and the third, and all the followed drove, saying, On this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. And say ye moreover, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face. Peradventure he will accept me. What's he looking for? Acceptance with Esau's brother. And so notice he says, So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. Now, and I know we're getting close to time, but when Saul is Saul's name changed to Paul, or is it just Saul who is also called Paul? It's also called Paul, right? He was Saul and Paul. It wasn't a name change. Was Abram's name changed? Right? Here we have what? Jacob's not called something else. It's what? His name is changed. He says, You will no longer be called Jacob, but what? Israel. Why? For a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. Can you imagine if you're told that statement? You're a prince that hast power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. God's telling him what? You've already won. You're a prince. You have power with me. You have power with men, and you have prevailed. It's a done deal. Why? Because God told him at the beginning, I'm going to be with you. You're going back into the country, and I'm going to be with you until I get you back there. In God's mind, it's already a done thing. Of course, Jacob's dealing with all this stuff. And he says, verse 29, and Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So then, what does Peniel mean? Seen face to face with God, and my life is preserved. Huh?